The weather's warming up and store shelves are filling up with books on the latest running trends, how to run faster, farther, and longer. When it comes to exercise, most of us have grown up assuming that more is better. But many fitness experts are changing their tune. They're now learning that running fast and hard isn't so good for your health. Apparently, there is such a thing as too much exercise.
There have been some recent studies, one in particular, that suggested that people who run a lot actually had poor outcomes or more deaths and disease than people who did less exercise. And in fact, their mortality was similar to that of sedentary people, which is concerning.
That's Dr. Carol Ewing Garber, professor of movement sciences at Teachers College, Columbia University. And you heard her correctly. Research now shows that intense runners have a mortality rate similar to sedentary people, couch potatoes. The study's authors speculate that too much running may damage the heart. The people who lived the longest, according to the study, were those who exercised lightly or moderately. Garber says just a small amount of exercise has great health benefits.
It does seem to be a fairly moderate amount. Our recommendations currently are for about 30 minutes a day of moderate activity, like a walk, for example, and that you wouldn't have to do that all in one time. We do have some recent studies that suggest even doing less than that might be adequate in terms of giving health benefits. I think probably the most important thing is that people are active, so something's better than nothing, and that you do this on a regular basis.
But for a couch potato, even 30 minutes a day might sound like too much. That's when the advice to simply get out of the chair can be helpful.
One thing that people can do that is not too difficult to attain is just doing things like getting up out of your chair every hour and walking around for a couple of minutes. And that has been shown to have some very powerful effects on some health-related biomarkers. The reality is that for many of us, we spend, 10, 12, or more hours just sitting and not moving at all, and that is really bad for our health.
It's hard to know how much exercise you're getting. That's why Garber says a pedometer is a great tool for monitoring physical activity throughout the day.
Our recommendations are that you're as active as possible in your daily life and that you reduce the amount of time you spend sitting and doing sedentary things, but also that it's recommended that you do some kind of intentional physical activity, and that could be going for a walk. It doesn't have to necessarily be something where you go to the gym or do something that requires you to change your clothes.
Experts say even physically fit people more than 40 years old lose 1% of muscle mass every year. But it doesn't take much exercise to minimize those effects.
If you go back to the hunter and gatherer days, we ran in spurts a little bit here and there, and that was body maintenance. As a matter of fact, if you want to minimize muscle loss, you can minimize that by as little as 5 to 10 minutes of aerobic activity a couple times a week. So the human body needs very little for maintenance.
That's Dr. Vijay Vaught, a sports medicine specialist at the Hospital for Special Surgery in New York and assistant professor of rehabilitation medicine at Weill Cornell Medical College. He's also author of the book, The New Rules of Running, where he outlines a program for the recreational runner who wants to stay fit, not run a marathon.
We all run differently. We all run at different speeds. Our running mechanics are all individualized and different, and so your running speed should be geared towards you. If you want to be a life walker or a runner, do it at a comfortable pace. That's for you.
In other words, don't feel intimidated by all the runners speeding past, leaving you in the dust. Vaught says running at your own slow pace has tremendous health benefits.
There's lots of data now. Running makes you smarter, it preserves your brain. Even if you're doing something as little as 2 miles couple times a week at a slow pace, that's enough to have a huge positive impact as far as endorphins, as far as preservation of the brain. So you don't have to be running 15 miles 3 times a week to get those benefits.
In addition, Vaught says slow running for shorter distances is much better on your joints.
Slow running, what it actually does is avoids a lot of the negative side effects of very hard, very fast running. It really minimizes what we call the shear loads. Shear loads are sort of loads on the joints that are uneven loads, and the joints really don't like that because then you can start getting arthritis in the knee joints if you're putting too much shear loads on it. Life is a marathon, and you've got to pace yourself. So you can't burn through it in the first 50 years of your life. If you look at my personal example, I cut running down to 2 to 3 days a week, really more 2 days than 3 days a week because, I'm getting into that mid-40s range, and I want to preserve my joints into 50s and 60s. And so I combine that with Stairmaster or elliptical or, low impact.
But how do you stay motivated to exercise just a little bit every day?
I think that, just noticing how you feel after you exercise and starting to be a little bit more mindful or aware of how you're feeling. And often people aren't that mindful and noticing how their body feels. So I think that paying attention to that and even keeping track can be really helpful, because sometimes you don't realize, especially when you first start exercising, you might not feel like it's very pleasant and you're wondering if you want to keep going. And then after a while, there's sort of some point that people usually report that they feel so much better.
But you got to do it throughout your life. I mean, you can't do it for 2 years and think the benefits will last for a lifetime. So it's one of those things you got to do in small moderation. You could do it throughout your life. The human body is an amazing machine, and it needs minimal maintenance to stay fine-tuned. So get off your butt and do something 30 minutes, 5 days a week.
Perhaps knowing that just a moderate amount of activity can keep you healthy may inspire some of us to start moving a little more each day. So the next time you're out shopping, instead of wasting time looking for the closest parking spot possible, take the farthest parking spot and walk the extra distance. You'll feel better and better the more you do it. You can learn more about our guests and find a link to the book, The New Rules of Running, through a link on our website, radiohealthjournal.net. You can always find our shows on iTunes and Stitcher. Our writer this week is Polly Hansen. Our production director is Sean Waldron. I'm Nancy Benson.
The number of people living with and dying from Alzheimer's disease is growing. But according to the Alzheimer's Association 2015 Alzheimer's Disease Facts and Figures report, only 45% of them or their caregivers say they were told their diagnosis. Beth Kallmeyer, Vice President of Constituent Services for the Alzheimer's Association, says, in contrast, more than 90% of people with the four most common cancers or their caregivers were told their diagnosis.
These shockingly low Alzheimer's disclosure rates are reminiscent of cancer 60 years ago, when even mention of the word was taboo. The Alzheimer's Association believes people with Alzheimer's should be told their diagnosis. When this news is delivered with sensitivity, it allows the person with Alzheimer's to maximize their quality of life and to play an active role in planning for their future.
Once there is a diagnosis, care and support services are available, making it easier for the person with Alzheimer's and their family to live the best life possible, including participation in research studies. Find out more about the new Facts and Figures report at alz.org.
An estimated 30% of the population suffers from irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS. IBS symptoms can often take the joy out of eating the foods you love. But this IBS Awareness Month, you can learn how to eat without worry. 75% of IBS sufferers get relief with a low FODMAP diet alone. Medical nutrition therapist and registered dietitian Patsy Katsos.
I often recommend a diet low in FODMAPs, free of certain sugars and fibers, to help patients enjoy the foods they love by eliminating ingredients that trigger symptoms. The high-potency probiotic medical food VSL number 3 may also be added to help patients manage their diet.
VSL number 3 is at least 10 times more potent than most probiotics and clinically proven for the dietary management of IBS. VSL number 3 differs from other probiotics in that it is a medical food and must be used under medical supervision. So ask your doctor about VSL number 3. VSL number 3 products are kept refrigerated behind the pharmacy counter. Find low FODMAP IBS-friendly recipes at VSL3.com.
Geico presents Fan Mail to a Pig.
Dear Maxwell, I just want to say thank you for making my Geico Insurance ID card digital. It's easy to find on the app. It doesn't give me paper cuts, and I always have it on hand because it's on my phone. Because of this, I finally cleaned out my glove box, which was filled with years of paper ID cards. Any thought on what I should put in my glove box now? Sincerely, Trent Patterson. Trent, what can you put in the glove box? Here's a crazy thought. How about gloves?
Digital insurance ID cards, just a tap away on the Geico app.